Good morning. I'm Davis Baird. I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost here at Clark University. And I first want to thank you for your patience. And on behalf of the faculty, students, staff, and trustees of the university, I am delighted to welcome you all here to Clark for our program today. Clark's president, David Angel, very much wanted to be here, but he is traveling and out of state. It is also my pleasure to welcome to Clark some public officials who have made time in their busy schedules to be with us this morning. I have a set here, and if you would just stand, let me start with Senator Harriet Chandler. Senator Michael Moore. Senator Jamie Eldridge. Former Lieutenant Governor Tim Murray. Former Senator Jerry D'Amico. Representative Mary Keefe. Representative Daniel Donahue. Representative Jim O'Day. City Councilor Candy Merrow Carlson. City Councilor Sarai Rivera. Did I miss anyone? Okay. The annual Lee Gurel Lecture on Education is quickly becoming a highlight of the Clark annual calendar of events. This is the 6th time we've come together to hear a distinguished speaker address critical issues in American education, a topic which our university has both a deep interest and obvious stake. We at Clark are the endpoint of the cradle to college pipeline, yet still quite early in our students' path towards what is our goal for our graduates of fulfilling adulthoods, rewarding careers, and valuable contributions to civic life. Clark has a long record of involvement and accomplishment in the field of public education. For 2 decades, we have partnered with the Worcester Public Schools, placing our faculty and students in the classrooms of several of the schools in our Main South neighborhood, and serving as the founding partners of the University Park Campus School, one of the leading public middle and high schools in America. Clark is especially proud of our MAT program, which every year produces a new class of committed urban teachers, many of whom go on to careers in the Worcester Public Schools. And so it is fitting and proper that we should gather here at Clark for today's Gurel Lecture to consider and discuss these issues that are important to our city, our state, and our nation. We are able to present these lectures thanks to the generosity and vision of one of our truly special Clark alums, Dr. Lee Gurel, class of 1948. Lee Gurel grew up here in Worcester, graduated from Clark, and went on to a distinguished career as a research psychologist. Several years ago, Lee made a major gift to Clark to create an endowment within our Mazakowski Institute to support faculty, research, and an annual lecture in the field of education. Lee's long and dedicated support for his alma mater includes not only the Gurel Endowment, but awards he has established for an outstanding student and professor in the field of psychology, for an outstanding student in Asian studies, as well as for an annual summer workshop at Clark for high school teachers. I am more than delighted to report that Lee Gurel is with us today. Lee, would you please stand and let us convey our deep thanks to you for all that you've done for Clark? For the first time this year, in addition to the Gorell Lecture, we will be holding a Gorell Symposium on urban education. The symposium, which will consider how our schools can provide deeper learning experiences for urban students, will feature 4 close observers of and participants in the American educational system. The symposium will take place immediately following the Gorell Lecture, and I hope that most of you will be able to stay for this first-of-a-kind event. Today's events are being live streamed, and if any of you, either here in the Atwood Hall or in Jefferson 320 just across the campus, or watching on the internet anywhere in the world, feel the urge to live tweet about the event, I hope I'm saying this right, please use hashtag Gorell Lecture, all one word. Today's lecture and symposium have been a joint effort with our friends and partners at Mass Inc. Mass Inc. is dedicated to research, journalism, and ideas about civic life in Massachusetts, and is the publisher of the indispensable Commonwealth magazine. We at Clark share many interests with Mass Inc., from education to gateway cities to engaged citizenship, and we are very pleased to have worked together to make today's Gorell Lecture possible. Before I pass the podium to Ben Foreman, who will introduce our speaker, I thought a personal note. When I last participated in the introduction of a notable politician, it was Ron Paul. I am extremely happy to be here, helping to introduce someone with a very different and much more personally appealing approach, Elizabeth Warren. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ben Foreman, the Research Director of Mass Inc. and Executive Director of the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute, who will introduce this year's distinguished Gorell Lecturer.
Thank you, Provost Byard. On behalf of Mass Inc., I want to thank Clark University and the Mazikowski Institute for their partnership in organizing today's symposium, but also their support all along the way in our Gateway Cities initiative from the very beginning. 3 years ago, we actually came together here at Clark with Gateway City education leaders to begin a year-long process of crafting together a collaborative vision for community-wide learning systems in our state's gateway cities. This vision called for increasing access to early learning, expanding the school day, providing social-emotional supports that are critical to lifelong well-being, doing better to nurture newcomers, and ensuring that all of our students are on paths to college and career success. Those are the tangible elements of our strategy, but we also spent a lot of time as leaders thinking about the why, trying to craft a narrative. That narrative began with what our gateway cities are going to be to our Commonwealth in the 21st century. And the clear answer is they're going to be places that produce human talent. They're home to 1/4 of our Commonwealth's youth. If our economy is going to stay competitive, it's critical that all these young people realize their full potential. We read recently on the front page of the Globe that economic inequality is leading to increasingly economically segregated communities in our Commonwealth. That youth who hope to gain the skills in our economy are increasingly isolated from opportunity and the learning experiences that they're going to need to reach their full potential. The Globe explicitly named our gateway cities as the places where these opportunities were lacking, where economic inequality is rooting itself and perpetuating this cycle. The words they used to describe our Commonwealth's gateway cities bore no resemblance at all to what we outlined together in our gateway city vision for dynamic community-wide learning systems. So the question for us all is how? How can we change this dynamic, enable all of our youth to receive the opportunities they'll need to have that opportunity? For 2 decades, we've been working on that problem at Mass Inc. Our founding mission was to support the growth and vitality of our middle class. And frankly, it's been a bit disheartening to see the trajectory of our Commonwealth since our founding. And it's hard to believe that one little think tank could make a difference in such a major problem. But what gives us tremendous hope as we do this work is Senator Warren. She was but one faculty member who, with carefully crafted research and strong, powerful presentation, has changed the national dialogue, and she's bending the arc of policy. In our time, this is especially rare. And I know that it inspires me, and it inspires all of you at Clark who aren't content with the status quo. When we're dealing with such enormously complicated issues, it's hard to stand out alone, even when your intentions are pure. And yet Senator Warren has done that repeatedly in Washington. And her stances haven't halted progress. They've made for better policy. And I think the issue that we're talking about today, the law, is another example of where she's done that. She was one of just 3 members of her party to vote no in the legislation that passed the Senate last July. And her dissent attracted a lot of attention and resulted in a better bill from the perspective of providing more accountability for federal funds that are directed at our most vulnerable students. So for us, in terms of achieving our Gateway Cities vision, broadly speaking, the how is emulating Senator Warren as we speak out and empower our Gateway City students to speak out on behalf of the educational experiences they need for equitable opportunity in our Commonwealth. But even more specifically, the how before us today is how we implement this new policy, the Every Child Succeeds Act, to build a stronger community-wide learning system for our Gateway City students. And to begin this dialogue, please offer a very warm welcome to our senior United States Senator, Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Ben, for the very generous introduction. It is great to be here at Clark University for the 6th annual Lee Gurel Lecture. I just want to start by saying how pleased I am that Dr. Lee Gurel is able to be here with us today. He is a wonderful man, and for decades he has been a real champion of public education, and it is a great honor for me to stand here and deliver a lecture in his name. Dr. Gurel, thank you. I also want to say a very special thank you to Clark University, to President David Angel, to Provost Foreman, to Institute Director Jim Gomes, and to all you Clarkies out there today who come in on a Monday morning, to talk about an issue that is critically important to all of us, public education in America. You know, speaking before you at this symposium about public education reminds me of my own journey into public service. I was not a little girl who had firmly fixed my sights on being a United States Senator. That wasn't quite within the range of what I was thinking, but I did have ambitions to be a school teacher. And for me, that was the tops. And in some ways, it still is. Teaching is not a job. Teaching is a calling. I know where it started for me. I loved my 2nd grade teacher, Ms. Lee. She was truly wonderful. And when she told me one day, you know, Betsy, someday you could grow up to be a teacher, it changed my understanding of the world. I stood a little taller, I spoke a little clearer, and I organized my dollies into Let's Play School. We were heavy on reading and snack time. Actually, it was tough being one of my dollies. I mean, day after day. My first job out of college was to be a teacher. I taught little ones, children with special needs in a public elementary school. And after I went to law school, had 2 children, I managed to find my way back into the classroom, teaching in law school much taller students. So I've taught the range, is how I look at it. Being a United States Senator gives me a somewhat different perspective than I had from my elementary school classroom, but I have never lost my appreciation for the importance of strong public education and the vital role that the federal government plays in making sure that every kid has a real opportunity and a fighting chance to succeed. 62 years ago, the United States Supreme Court issued Brown versus the Board of Education, declaring school segregation unconstitutional. In May 1954, before I had ever started school, Chief Justice Warren, no relation, although in law school, I had a constitutional law professor who thought it was very funny to call on me for every Warren opinion. Chief Justice Warren, in Brown versus Board of Education, delivered his opinion to the country, and I want to read you the words from it. I brought them with me. Today, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he or she is denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity, where the state has undertaken to provide it, is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. Can I have an amen on that? You bet. Available to all on equal terms. Those are powerful words, but they ran into a hard reality. The next year, the Supreme Court ruled that schools were required to use, quote, all deliberate speed to integrate classrooms. But let's face it, a lot of people didn't want to change. Nearly 20 years later, I was a young law student who was asked to write on a case in which Virginia continued to resist desegregating its schools. Across America, racism ran deep and its hold was strong. Now, one of America's most iconic paintings is Norman Rockwell's The Problem We All Live With. I hope many of you in this room know it. If you don't, you've got your iPhones, you can look it up real fast. The Problem We All Live With is the title of it. It's from the 1960s, and it features Ruby Bridges. She's a 6-year-old black child, scrubbed and shining for the first day of school. She's wearing new shoes and a white dress, and she's accompanied by 4 U.S. Marshals. On the wall behind her is an ugly racial epithet and a smashed tomato. But Ruby is marching straight ahead with a kind of dignity and determination that should put every adult to shame. Her message is clear. I belong here, and I will take my rightful place here. Ruby is the star of this painting, but the federal officials, with their heads just cropped out of the frame, are flanking young Ruby to protect her right to a decent education. And they are a reminder that we move forward together. When state and local governments blocked Ruby, the federal government was there for her. By the time President Johnson was in the White House, Brown was nearly a decade old, and its promise of all deliberate speed seemed at that point just to be an invitation to delay. Lyndon Johnson knew that one critical way to force states that were reluctant to go along, to get them to comply with school integration and to expand educational opportunities, was to put some money on the table. So in 1965, he did that with the first Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It was part of our civil rights laws. A key purpose of this landmark civil rights law was to drive desegregation in the South in the 1960s by withholding this new federal funding from school districts that failed to integrate. It was federal accountability for how those federal funds were to be used. ESEA was meant to counteract the crippling effects of poverty in America's schools, more federal resources to support the schools that needed it most. I want to do another quote here because I think it's every bit as important as what was said in Brown versus the Board of Education. When President Johnson signed ESEA, he said, quote, "I know that education is the only valid passport from poverty, the only valid passport. I believe deeply no law I have signed or will ever sign means more to the future of America." In 2016, as in 1965, more federal resources coupled with strong federal accountability for serving historically marginalized groups of kids is still at the heart of this education law. Today, the majority of our public school children live in poverty. Students of color in the largest 100 American cities are more likely to attend schools where most of their peers are in poverty. And last school year, for the first time in U.S. history, children of color made up the majority of students attending America's public schools. I want you to think for a minute about what these new data mean for public education in America. We live in a new public education reality, and a strong federal role in public education is more important now than ever before. We cannot abandon our children. So I want to talk a little bit more about our new laws on this. Ben mentioned that I've been very heavily involved in this. At the tail end of last year, Congress passed a reauthorization of ESEA. And at the White House ceremony for the signing of the bill, I heard President Obama call it a Christmas miracle. We managed to get it through. Now, the bill was an unexpected achievement because it was truly bipartisan. It was supported by Republicans and Democrats in its final form, teachers and principals, parent groups and superintendents. It was the first bill in 20 years endorsed by organizations that represent all 50 state governors. Of course, part of that collective enthusiasm came from the fact that No Child Left Behind was so unpopular that passing anything that got rid of No Child Left Behind was woohoo for a lot of people. You know how broken that law was and how much it needed to be fixed. But as problematic as No Child Left Behind was, and as anxious as everyone was to replace it, and as much momentum as there was for replacing it, it was very important to me, very important for the Obama administration, and very important for some of my Democratic colleagues in Congress to ensure that we replace it with a bill that is true to its roots and that serves the kids who need it most. When ESEA was passed 50 years ago, it was a landmark civil rights achievement. The federal government committed itself to improving educational opportunity for children who had been underserved, who had been mistreated, or who had been outright ignored by our public schools. But the early drafts of the legislation to reauthorize ESEA for this go-round to replace No Child Left Behind lacked even the minimum safeguards to ensure that the states would use federal funds in the right places. The original Republican version of this bill was effectively like a block grant. Just give the money to the states and let them spend it any way they want. To me, this was just a non-starter. I voted against the first version of the bill, and I fought alongside the president to ensure that federal education dollars came with commitments about how the states would use that money. I thought that was absolutely critical. Yeah. And let me just underscore, one of those expectations is for states to actually target their efforts toward kids who need the help most. Hard fought, but we got it, and I just got to say, the final bill is a whole lot better than the bill that they started out with. For example, I want to give you two examples of what changed in the bill. The new law includes an amendment that Senator Cory Booker and I put together to help ensure that the 1,200 high schools in the United States where fewer than 2/3 of students graduate each year get some extra help. I want you to think about that. We have 1,200 high schools across this country where fewer than 2/3 of the students graduate each year. And so we managed to put more resources into those schools. This means that states can't turn a blind eye to struggling kids in under-resourced schools, and it ensures that the schools that clearly need the help are the schools that will get the help. We thought that that was absolutely essential. There's another bill I co-sponsored with another Cory, this time with Republican Senator Cory Gardner. We got in an amendment that requires the states to report better data. So for all of you who like to study education, you know how important it is to have the numbers. And so what we insisted on in this bill that had never been there before was not just that the states have to report the data, but they have to do what is termed in the bill cross-tabulated data reporting, which means now that parents, that teachers, that researchers across the country will be able to look at the outcomes of different groups of students. For example, young Latinas, teenaged African-American boys, or low-income children with special needs. By being able to look at subgroups and do that systematically over time, it helps us better understand how our schools are serving or not serving students, and to identify student groups that need more help, and to identify programs that are actually working. You can tell that your senior senator from here in Massachusetts is at heart a data nerd. I think this one is going to help us make a real difference going forward. So I mentioned two of these as important accountability provisions. They speak to why we have a federal education law in the first place, to make sure that all our children, regardless of race or income or zip code or state, have the same opportunity to get a great education. And ESEA is now a step in the right direction, but I want to be clear, it is only one step. The federal role in protecting educational opportunities for people of color does not stop at high school. We know that to get a college degree, more Black and low-income students borrow money, and they borrow more money than their white counterparts. For example, while less than 2/3 of white college students graduate from public colleges with debt, which is still way too much, 4 out of 5 Black students graduate from the same schools with student debt. We also know that many for-profit colleges, particularly the shadiest outfits, prey on people of color, on low-income people, on first-generation college students, and on people who have already suffered at the hands of American educational inequality. Black and Latino students make up less than 1/3 of all college students, but nearly half of all for-profit college students. Not only do for-profit students graduate at much lower rates than they do at not-for-profit schools, they also are almost certain to leave with massive amounts of unsustainable debt. I want to give you 3 numbers. just to lock in your mind, because it's easy to forget that there's another whole world out there on higher education. 10, 20, 40. These are roughly the numbers of 10%. 1 in every 10 college students is in a for-profit college. Those colleges are sucking down 20% of all federal aid and loan dollars, and those colleges' graduates or dropouts are responsible for more than 40% of all the defaults in the federal system. This is not working. The federal government has an important role to play on the side of our students. Instead of funneling money into these schools on a no questions asked basis and signing students up literally for billions of dollars of student loans collectively that they cannot possibly repay, the federal government should crack down on predatory for-profit colleges and make sure that federal dollars are going to the places that are trying to educate our students. You bet. So I've talked about 2 key areas where I think the federal government has a very important role to play in public education, but I want to mention a few more. Things the federal government can do and should do. The federal government can ensure that a debt-free college option is available for all students, particularly for students who are most likely to graduate with debt. The federal government can do this. The federal government can fight back against resource inequality in our schools, and that means inner-city public schools get the same music and art classes, the same school nurses, the same advanced placement courses, and the same high-quality teachers as white suburban schools. That's what we believe in. The federal government can ensure that young dreamers are able to access the same great education as their peers. No punishment just because they were brought to the United States as children. The federal government can ensure that Black and Latino students aren't disproportionately suspended from school and sent tumbling down the school-to-prison pipeline. We can do that. The federal government can ensure that Black and Latino students aren't disproportionately pushed into special education classes. Also very important. Yes. Let's throw in one more. The federal government can ensure that every young girl has equal access to sports, science, math, whatever it is she wants to study. You bet. For me, all of this is personal. It is because of public education that the daughter of a janitor ended up as the senior senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If it hadn't been for public schools, first grade through 12th grade, I never made it to kindergarten, and if it hadn't been for a public college that gave me a chance to get a diploma and then opened a million doors for me, I wouldn't be standing on this stage today. I never forget where I came from and what an educational opportunity means for a kid who's just willing to try hard. The federal government has a critical role to play in standing up to protect the educational opportunities of low-income children and children of color. But we have a lot of work to do before every kid in this country gets a great education. We can do it if we remember that these aren't other people's children. These are our children, every single one of them. And we want every one of our children, regardless of race or income or zip code, to get a world-class education. We want not just some of our children, but all of our children to have a fighting chance to build a future. And that starts with public education. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.